Hey yo, what up everyone, how we all doing? Back again, man. World War II, Oversimplified Part 1. For those of you wondering about there was going to be like a Hitler, a 2-part episodes about Hitler in between this and the Russian Revolution. I didn't realise the Hitler one's banned in the UK. Like, we're not even allowed to look at it. So next time you're in America and you moan that you're not free, just remember, we can't even educate ourselves over here. And now we're in lockdown, so we can't even leave our house. But don't worry, because we live in a democracy. Anyway, first of all, before we get into the video, what the hell is happening in America? Right, I'm watching this presidential election, and I'm hearing voter fraud this, Michigan this, Wisconsin this, Nevada, Arizona that, Dems pointing at Republicans, Republicans pointing at Dems. What's going on? Oh man, I thought we was going to hear a result. I don't know, but now they're talking about Friday. I remember back in 2000, I've heard that I think it was 28 or 38 days later between Al Gore and Bush. Still wasn't a result. Hope it's not that, man. I wanna. Oh, and that's another thing. When the president when the president gets elected, do I make a video about it? Do we watch some stuff on it? You let me know, man. But anyway, let's jump straight into the video because I feel like I've been talking a while. But let's get into it.
This video was made possible by Skillshare. Churchill was a man with many talents. He was an artist, a butterfly enthusiast, and he had an unpublished manuscript about aliens. Clearly, he was a man with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Maybe.
Oh, before we really get into Churchill, just remember that a lot of people in the UK all of a sudden really don't like Churchill anymore. I don't know. Let's not get into that, actually.
He could have loaded up his computer and logged onto Skillshare, an online learning community. He was considering a side career in fashion, or if he found courses for all of these experts working in courses after walks to try it out first, which can be found. Be sure to do. Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement.
Yeah. Wait, I thought Mussolini was pro-war. I swear Mussolini was pro-war because he thought it would bring about the change that, we could kind of sneak some socialism into Europe.
But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist...
I haven't watched this video before. I swear to God, I haven't watched. This happened the other day. I said something and then it come up right after. I haven't watched this video, man, I swear.
Revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war. But his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples, just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with... bold.
Let's go with... bold.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister. And the king said, you and what army? This army. Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have, and a new rule was established that every Englishman withheld the right to walk into the center of Berlin, pick out any German they wanted, and spank the hell out of them. I made that last one up, but it helps you understand how all of this felt to Germans. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew.
Hey, did anyone ever watch that? I haven't been able to find it since, and I really wish I could. I'm just bringing it back a little bit. There was a short 2-part series on Netflix, and I think it was like an hour and a half each, but it was about Hitler's life and coming up in Austria and moving to Germany, getting drafted into the war, becoming an artist, all that stuff. And it was a brilliant little series, man. Haven't been able to find it since, so if any of you know what I'm on about, let me know if you know the name of it. And if you haven't watched it, definitely check it out, man, if you can find it. But yeah, it sums this up really well.
Nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more
radical nationalism, totalitarianism, violence and militarism, anti-democratic, anti-socialist, extremely racist. Quite racist. I didn't even notice this one. Quite racist. Yeah, okay.
More importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're going to trade with us and you're going to like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay.
Oh, if you're wondering how that happened, this was back when China was nowhere near what it is today. China was actually China back in the day was really obsessed with culture and art and not so much military expansion, and that's kind of how that happened. I'm oversimplifying it, but you get the gist.
This stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia. And then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, fascist Italy,
what the fuck?
and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did.
I mean, if you step away from the obvious, the racism side of it, Germany, Italy, and Japan have very good reasons to be pissed off. All of them do. All of them, and worst of all of it is justified. So, like, when you've got justifiable actions and a justifiable means to go to war, you can feel free to just sneak some extra shit on top, and the general public would often, well, especially back then when they were so easily influenced, a bit of racial superiority sprinkled in on top of it is kind of no big deal. And plus, like, as anti-Semitic as Germany is at this point, the reason it didn't really get any attention is because levels of anti-Semitism across Europe and North America were high anyway. The Jews weren't a liked people anywhere in the world, so what Germany was doing didn't really stand out until it got really brutal in like the late 1930s.
Feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff. And so they did. Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, "I want that thing," and the Allies would say, "You can't have that thing, okay?"
That's Neville Chamberlain. He was actually if you look into him, he's actually a pretty good prime minister. He just handled Hitler and World War II terribly. It wasn't an utter catastrophe start to finish, but he implemented some pretty decent social policies. Kinda.
Hey, you can have that thing, but no more. I want that thing. And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, "Look, we're going to give you what... Hang on. This meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too?"
No.
Anyway, we're going to give you what you want. Really? Yeah. Just like that? Yep. What's the catch? Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Okay. Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace, and we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with...
I think he's on about Ethiopia. I'm just pausing because I want to see if I'm right.
A not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the... Oh, there is?
Yeah, okay, that's modern day Ethiopia, isn't it? Right. I thought it was... Yeah.
Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their...
There's some great books on the rape of Nanking. Really brutal, like that. It's probably in the top 5 most brutal events in history. If we're talking about like what one human can do to another human being, it's really graphic and brutal. I can't think of the name of one of the top of the books off my head, but there's plenty out there.
Their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now, he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, "How about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future." Sounds good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany.
Sorry, I know we keep pausing a lot, but it's a short video, so there's no harm in it. Just skip over me talking if you want. A lot of historians say this is the point where Hitler lost the war. So, I know it's technically when the war started, but they say if he would have built up his military a lot more. Britain wasn't building a military at the time, neither was France. They were still recovering from World War One. If he would have waited 2 or 3 more years to build up a military and then attacked, then it would have been successful. Maybe he would have at least took Europe. And then obviously the other point is Operation Barbarossa, where Hitler invaded Russia prematurely and got caught off in the winter. They're 2 key moments in the war.
The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy. And at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War, and so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then, the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your airfields. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process.
If I'm not mistaken, where's the book? Well, I've got a book anyway. It talks about, what Hitler's, political and social policies were at the early stages of the war. And at this point, he still thought an alliance with the UK would be possible, right? Who he'd evidently betrayed later on. But can you imagine? Churchill was never the type to, create an alliance with with Hitler. I think Neville Chamberlain might have been open to it, to be honest, just to keep the war away and to be on the winning side, by the looks of it. But can you imagine Russia, Germany, and then UK, who was a lot more powerful than it is today? It's still a global superpower at this point. Obviously, we're not anymore. We're what you call what's it called? A local power, European. I don't know. But yeah.
Then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the Phony War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk.
Yes, that's really interesting. So the way Blitzkrieg used to work, obviously it would, they'd rush tank divisions through. Wehrmacht is like German for army, basically. They'd rush tank divisions through and kind of capture armies in like pincer movements. So say you wanted to attack this French division, they'd send like a panzer division through here and a panzer division through here, and kind of encircle them as the infantry pushed up here. But the problem was that the Germans often had is that they'd pincer too far, so their supply lines would, like their panzer divisions would be here, and the rest of the supporting army with the supplies is still pushing up. So then, like later on during the war, I know I'm kind of jumping ahead. What they'd do is, as the Germans kind of pincered here, the Allies would attack the supply lines here, while the Wehrmacht divisions are here, and they get left with no oil, which in one case actually forced the panzer divisions to like just leave their panzers and walk back, to the homeland. This is like during the Battle of the Bulge, years later, but it just kind of gives you an idea of how Blitzkrieg worked.
The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too, but they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south, but the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came while the
It didn't tell you here, but you see this little island here? That's called Jersey, and Germans did actually take that. The British told them to leave. Like, we sent an email saying emails. We sent them emails. We let them know that the Germans were probably going to take this little island, but a lot of the people just stayed anyway and said, I don't care, I'm not leaving.
Soil. He would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British Invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to
that's what saved Britain. Like, we were, apparently from reports, we were weeks away from losing, like, the Battle of Britain. Our airfields were just smashed to bits. Our communication centres were gone. Just, like, we couldn't get a break. So Hitler in a desperate attempt, Churchill in a desperate attempt, bombed Berlin to actually open up the possibility of attacking civilian targets in the UK. As brutal as that sounds, he knew that we would lose civilian casualties, but it would give us a chance to reconstruct our air force, to get the airfields back in order, to set up kind of communication posts along here. This is when we'd discovered radar. I don't think at this point we've discovered radar, but when we do, we had an effective communication system for kind of letting civilians know when the bombs were going to fall.
Immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm. Smiling, knitting, lounging casually, these people have balls of steel. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
Yeah, I think I can't remember the exact dates, but at one point the bombings actually continued for 365 days. There was a bombing every single night. Yeah, it's crazy to think. So where were we in this? We're about 1940. Oh God, that's terrible. Yeah, it's 1939. We're probably looking at around August 1940 at this point. I'm assuming around about there. To think that Europeans wouldn't actually land like in mainland Germany. The British and Americans wouldn't land in mainland Europe for another 4 years. At this point, is crazy. If you just think about this for a second. So Donald Trump's been in office for 4 years. So imagine 4 years ago, we got into a war, and we're being bombed every day. You would have to wait to the end of Donald Trump's election before we actually put troops on the ground. Like, when you think of it like that, it's weird. I know there was fighting going on in Asia and Africa and in the Pacific and all of that. But I mean, like, actually a central invasion of Northern Europe. I know the Americans come up through Italy, and took care of them. But it's just crazy when you think about it like that. I love these videos. I've got to head out in a bit, but I'll upload this and we'll get part 2 done tomorrow. I'm sorry that I can't do 2 parts in one day. I've just got a bit quite a lot on later on today. But thanks for joining me, man. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and we get to see the Americans get involved in part 2. There might be a part 3. I'm not sure. But anyway, peace out, guys. Take it easy, man. Love you, bad.